we find ourselves exactly halfway through season 2, a fitting moment to turn toward a musical language that has, until now, largely remained in the background. Swinging drums, a walking bass, clashing horns, a piano in constant motion, and all that jazz. Jazz is not merely a genre that once broke new ground, it is a living form, forever testing and expanding its own boundaries. And yet, for many listeners, it represents a threshold. Jazz is often labeled inaccessible, too free, too complex, or simply not my cup of tea. Perhaps today some of those listeners will feel the pull of that universe of musical freedom. Still, it must be said, the album we are about to discuss may well be a bridge too far for the uninitiated. This is no cautious first step, no safe introduction to the genre. What it is, however, is a monument. An album more than 60 years old, yet as timeless now as it was at the moment of its release in 1965. Ladies and gentlemen, A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of We're Only in It for the Music, a YouTube series that takes you through the musical universe, from ABBA to Zappa and everything in between and beyond. Click the like and subscribe buttons, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss an episode. But enough of that, never mind the bollocks. We're only in it for the music. Jazz reveals itself in countless forms and faces. One can approach the genre chronologically, beginning with the early big bands of the 1920s, gradually traveling toward the experimental freedom of the late 1960s. That is not what we are doing today. Instead, we dive straight into the deep end and attempt to understand one of the most significant jazz albums ever recorded. For many jazz devotees, A Love Supreme stands as an absolute pinnacle of the genre. For listeners outside the jazz idiom, it may feel like an intense place to begin. And yet, once this album is truly embraced, something shifts. A door opens onto another musical dimension, a space where freedom, expression, and spirituality converge. It is time to begin. There is much to be discovered here. John William Coltrane, known to friends and fellow musicians simply as Train, was born in September 1926 in North Carolina. In a life that would last just 40 years, he would permanently alter the course of jazz, not by gently steering the form, but by breaking it open again and again. His musical foundation was laid in the swing and big band tradition, shaped in part during his time in the U.S. Navy. Through the 1940s and 1950s, he became ever more deeply rooted in bebop, a language of jazz in which virtuosity, improvisation, and intellectual rigor stand at the center. Mentors such as Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, and later Miles Davis did more than refine his technique. They confronted him with a fundamental question: how far can musical freedom truly be stretched? By the late 1950s, Coltrane began to emerge decisively as a solo artist. Albums like Blue Train and later Giant Steps reveal a musician pushing his instrument to its limits, stacking harmonies, expanding forms, and searching relentlessly for new possibilities. The success of My Favorite Things, familiar to many from The Sound of Music, gave him something crucial: artistic freedom. Yet alongside this musical ascent, a far more personal struggle was unfolding. Coltrane battled heroin addiction and alcoholism for years, until a profound spiritual awakening in 1957 changed the direction of his life. In the liner notes to A Love Supreme, he writes that this experience led him to pray, humbly and consciously, for the means and privilege to make others happy through music. He conquered addiction and developed a deeply spiritual outlook that could not be contained by any single creed or dogma. He studied both Eastern and Western traditions, increasingly viewing spirituality as a universal force. For Coltrane, music became more than expression. It became a vessel for gratitude, devotion, and connection. That conviction lies at the heart of A Love Supreme. The album was recorded in one concentrated session on December 9th, 1964, in the now legendary Rudy Van Gelder studio in New Jersey. Coltrane was surrounded by his formidable quartet, starring McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison on bass, and Elvin Jones on drums, with gong and timpani added to the palette. Together, they do not create a set of separate pieces, but a unified musical statement, often described as a tone poem. through which Coltrane conveys a profound spiritual message without words. In the album's gatefold, Coltrane himself emphasizes that the album is deliberately structured as a four-part suite, each movement marking a stage within a single continuous spiritual journey. And it is through those four parts that we will attempt, step by step, to unravel what this music is truly saying. A Love Supreme is built in four parts, each with its own subtitle. Together, they do not form a collection of separate pieces, but a suite that demands to be heard as a single, unified whole. Side A opens with Part 1, Acknowledgement, and from the very first sound, it is clear that this music asks for surrender. The strike of the gong immediately draws the listener into this musical journey. Over gentle piano chords, Train improvises a brief saxophone introduction, a familiar signature that confirms this is unmistakably a Coltrane album, while simultaneously signaling that the focus here reaches far beyond virtuosity alone. This album is rooted in recognition and gratitude. Then the double bass introduces the opening theme. Where in much popular music the bass, together with the drums, serves primarily a supportive, rhythmic function, here it takes on a distinctly melodic role. The drums feel less swinging than hypnotic, almost mantra-like. The quartet is complete. The journey can begin. What follows is an extended saxophone solo that, on first listen, may sound entirely free and unrestrained. With repeated listens, however, it becomes clear that Coltrane is carefully circling an underlying theme. The accompaniment gradually swells. The intensity increases, yet the music never loses its sense of focus. Around the 5-minute mark, something crucial happens. Coltrane takes over the four-note motif introduced by bassist Jimmy Garrison and plays it in unison on tenor saxophone. By moving through variations within the same scale, the motif continually shifts shape while its core remains intact. In total, Coltrane repeats this simple figure 36 times. It becomes the foundation of this first movement, a fixed anchor within which maximum freedom is possible. Just after the 6-minute mark, Coltrane begins to chant the album's title, A Love Supreme. He overdubs his own voice 19 times, transforming the chant into a collective, almost liturgical experience. This is not an explanation, but affirmation, an acknowledgement, exactly as the title of this movement suggests. As the voices fade, the other instruments gradually fall silent as well. Only the double bass continues for a brief moment longer, as if the music itself is reluctant to let go. Then, acknowledgement comes to an end, and the foundation is laid for everything that follows. Part 2, Resolution opens with a brief introduction by Jimmy Garrison on double bass, after which the full quartet enters with unmistakable force. Coltrane immediately presents a clear, recognizable theme that serves as the foundation for everything that follows. Where acknowledgement was about recognition and affirmation, resolution feels like a decision, the moment where intention is translated into action. Coltrane's first saxophone solo continuously orbits this central motif. The melody acts as a compass. No matter how far he strays, he always finds his way back to the core. After this initial surge, McCoy Tyner takes over. His piano solo moves between lightning-fast runs and angular, almost percussive chordal figures. The playing is powerful and purposeful, while the rhythm section drives the piece forward without hesitation. When Coltrane re-enters for his second solo, he sounds even more resolute than before. He pushes himself audibly to the limit, as if only total commitment will allow him to reach what he is searching for. Within the broader theme of A Love Supreme, this takes on clear meaning. Spiritual growth demands discipline, devotion, and the refusal to make concessions. Resolution thus stands as a musical statement. The recognition of the opening movement has given way to determination. With this intensity, Side A comes to a close, and the path is cleared for the deeper exploration that unfolds on Side B. The third movement of A Love Supreme, Pursuance, is the longest piece in the suite, running just over 10 minutes. Where resolution centers on determination, this movement is driven by the act of searching itself. The title can be translated as the pursuit of a goal. And that is exactly what we hear. Elvin Jones opens the piece with an explosive drum solo. This is not merely an introduction, it establishes the atmosphere immediately. Stillness gives way to motion, contemplation to urgency. Only after a minute and a half does the full quartet enter, as if the pursuit has truly begun. What follows is an intense interplay in which Coltrane and McCoy Tyner alternate on saxophone and piano. Beneath them, Jones and bassist Jimmy Garrison generate a constant, pulsing drive that propels the music relentlessly forward. After a long and forceful piano solo, Coltrane takes over with a swirling saxophone outburst. In his sustained notes, there is fervor. In the rapid scales and sharp bends, something close to obsession. Coltrane plays as if standing still is not an option. Here, the quartet deliberately pushes against the boundaries of structure. The music continually balances on the edge of collapse, as though it might fly apart at any moment. And just as that tension becomes almost unbearable, the musicians return to the motif. It is controlled chaos, maximum freedom guided by an inner compass. After more than 7 minutes, another brief drum intervention appears, followed by a solo from the double bass. These moments allow pursuance to breathe, offering the listener a chance to recover after the intense musical chase that has preceded them. Coltrane demands a great deal from his listener here. Pursuance is not a passive listening experience, but those willing to surrender fully will recognize that this restless search is essential in order to arrive where the album ultimately leads. The double bass plays the piece to its close, clearing the path for the fourth and final movement, Psalm. The closing movement of side B, and of the album as a whole, is also the shortest part of the suite, running just over 7 minutes. Psalm opens with timpani and saxophone. As a mood, it immediately is reaching back to the first movement, acknowledgement, as if beginning and end are being deliberately joined. The tempo is noticeably slower, and the music is allowed to breathe. There's no longer any frantic soloing. Instead, Coltrane chooses restraint and space. With fewer notes, he says more, an approach that deepens his playing profoundly. Where his sound earlier could feel fervent, even possessed, here we hear calm and acceptance. What makes Psalm especially significant is that Coltrane conceived this movement as a wordless prayer. The complete text of that prayer is printed in the gatefold sleeve. Every saxophone phrase here functions as a sentence not spoken, but played. The intensity is no longer built through speed or virtuosity, but through tone, timing, and the tension between the players. McCoy Tyner's piano and Elvin Jones's percussion create a sustained, almost ceremonial atmosphere, while Jimmy Garrison's bass anchors and holds the entire piece together. Coltrane's saxophone no longer sounds searching, but settled, as if he has come to realize that, both musically and spiritually, he has chosen the right path. Psalm thus feels like musical acceptance. No answer, no conclusion, only stillness. A solemn and dignified closing chapter to a suite devoted to recognition, determination, pursuit, and finally, peace. Four movements, 33 minutes of music, captured in a single concentrated studio session. Only 2 pieces were granted a second, so-called alternate take, both belonging to Acknowledgement, featuring sax player Archie Shepp and bassist Art Davis. Encased in the now iconic sleeve, bearing the restrained photograph of John Coltrane. A Love Supreme is more than a jazz album. It is a monument, a creative and spiritual statement by one of the most innovative musicians the world has ever known. Coltrane himself did not describe the album as a masterpiece, but as a humble attempt to express gratitude through music. If I were to describe A Love Supreme in a single word, it would be divine. Because A Love Supreme was never intended as a collection of separate tracks, but as a single, continuous suite, it feels inappropriate to single out individual favorites. The 4 movements exist only in relation to one another and lose their meaning the moment they are heard in isolation. For that reason, all 4 parts count among my favorites, without exception. The music is so layered and rich in texture that each listen reveals something new. A Love Supreme is not an album to be consumed, but a work one returns to, time and time again. And that was John Coltrane. That was A Love Supreme. What do you think of this jazz classic? Let me know in the comments. I'm always curious to hear your perspective. You can listen to A Love Supreme along with all the other music featured in this series in the Spotify playlist linked below. And be sure to follow the channel on Facebook and Instagram for updates and new episodes. Because I will follow you if you follow me. All links can be found in the description under this video. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Tell a friend about the channel. Why not? It truly helps and is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. And in the meantime, drop the needle, press play, and remember, we're only in it for the music.